Hello everybody and welcome to Anno 1800. I'm COLONELDAMNEDERS, and with the release of the final piece of Season 3 DLC, The High Life, I thought this was a better time than ever to go through the basics of one of my personal favourite city building strategy games. If you do want to try before you buy, the game is also on a free weekend right now over on Uplay, and I highly recommend trying it out if you're all interested in the genre. I have chapters covering all areas of the game, so feel free to jump around to areas of most interest to you by using the time codes on screen now as well as in the description. Firstly, let's go through what the game is actually about. Anno 1800 is a city builder set in a fictional version of the year 1800, strangely enough. Don't worry though, because when I say fictional, I just mean the world isn't laid out like it is in the real world. Everything else is mostly authentic to the time period, so you won't see any aliens or giant mechs walking around. Your objective is to build up your company using a collection of islands in a variety of locations. The base game has you spread between the new and old world, representing temperate and tropical locations, but with the DLC in tow, you'll unlock others such as an African-inspired area and even the Arctic, but we'll come to that later. But before we go any further, we need to handle the best part about any new game, tweaking the settings. Anno 1800 has a great little story mode that helps to teach you the basics up to the engineers, so if you're totally new, I recommend going with that and leaving all settings on default. If you want a more custom experience, however, go for Sandbox. From here you can tweak pretty much everything you could ever need. If you're new, the guidance can help, so I'd use that. It doesn't matter what you look like or name yourself, as it's all just cosmetic and can of course be changed later. You can select what DLCs to enable, if any, and if you have them, there's not really any harm in leaving them all on. Now the difficulty section is where it gets interesting. This lets you tweak everything, and by everything, I mean everything. There are 3 default settings, but if you want a more custom experience, then you can get really detailed with it. I'll rattle through each page and explain its purpose. On the first page, pretty much everything here is very self-explanatory if you hover over them, so I suggest reading each one and tweaking it to fit your specific needs. The characters page allows you to pick the other players or remove them altogether by right-clicking, and I'll come back to just how these fit into your games a bit later on. Faction customization lets you toggle the different NPCs in the game, such as the traders and pirates, so if you want a relaxing city building experience, then turn off the pirates and other players, then kick back and relax. Features are again explained by hovering over them, so just have a read and they will all make sense. Starting locations decide the conditions you start with, including your ships, resources, capital island size, and if there are any hidden parts of the map. And finally, victory conditions can be set if you want to have a set end to your campaign, otherwise you can really go on forever. Once everything is set, you're good to go to work on building up your islands. On these islands, you have to create housing for your residents and fulfill their needs so that you can attract high classes of people, which will of course pay more money. Their needs are in the form of a large number of different products of varying complexity, as well as proximity to certain buildings such as marketplaces to supply them with goods, and schools and universities to provide them with education. Your simple farmers have simple needs such as fish and clothing, whereas your engineers have more complex needs like canned food and spectacles. Fulfilling all the needs of a level of resident allows you to upgrade them to the next tier, where the cycle begins anew as you work to fulfill their new needs. And that leads us nicely into our second chapter, Resident Needs and Supply Lines. As I mentioned, all your people have needs and desires, and these quickly become complicated to fulfill. Side note, needs are required to attract more people to your residences and level them up to high tiers. Desires are goods that they can actually live without, but are happier with, and the happier your people are, the more money you make, and the less chance there is of them rioting or doing their jobs incorrectly, resulting in accidents. Most goods require some level of crafting, so clothing requires a sheep farm to create wool, which is then crafted into a knitter's into clothing, which is then sent to a warehouse, which enters the shared inventory of the entire island, which is then sent to a market to be distributed amongst your people. Little side note there about warehouses, every single warehouse on an island shares inventory, so if you put something into a warehouse on one side of the island, you'll be able to pull it out of another on the other side, and your dock also acts as a warehouse. Take engineers and their need of eyeglasses. These require 3 types of raw materials, 2 intermediate factories, and 1 final factory, all to produce 1 item, and they aren't even the top level. What this boils down to is the more skilled your people become, the more complicated their requirements. And of course, all these production buildings require staff of varying levels of skill. Naturally, your jobs such as crop farming and cattle ranching require farmers, and your simple factories such as steel require workers, and so on and so forth. So the game becomes this balancing act of creating your cities with enough resources so you can support a population large enough to create all these resources. And of course, the more people you have, the more resources they require, so it's all this big tug of war that is constantly going on for the entire game, and making sure that neither side is losing is a trick to moving forward. Side note, there's a super detailed stat screen where you can see the supply and demand for every single resource you are creating, and it's always worth checking in to make sure you aren't headed for disaster. There are far too many needs to explain individually, and I'd literally be saying the same thing every single time, but a very useful resource for maximum efficiency is a production layouts page on the wiki, which provides a huge number of layouts for every resource in the game, meaning you can spend less time doing maths and more time building up your islands. And yes, I did just say islands. Of course, with this many resources in the game, it'd be crazy if everything was available on every single island, so of course you'll be forced to branch out and set up networks of multiple islands working together to fulfill their needs. If you ask me, this is where the game hits a new level of complexity. Your attention is now required in many places at once, pretty much all the time, and in a game with no playable pause feature, this can be somewhat daunting. But worry not, all will be explained and made easier. So once you get to the stage where you have workers and artisans, which are the second and third tier of residents, you'll realise that some resources are missing, and that these are either hops or peppers or both. These are required for the beer desire of workers and the canned food need of artisans respectively. So there's nothing for it other than to find an island that allows you to generate these resources. By this point in the game, you should have been exploring the map, and I highly recommend doing this pretty much at the start of the game so you can work on your second island early, but nevertheless, if not, look for the biggest island you can that supports the resources you need, and move your ship over to it with 8 steel and as much wood as you can spare. If you're playing on normal difficulty, you should actually start with a ship ready to do this right out the gate. Once it's there, click on the Ghost of Docks Past and build it, and boom, the island is yours. Now all you have to do is the exact same thing as you did in your first island to increase the population to the point where you have enough workers to create that resource. This is why I recommend doing it at the start, otherwise your first island is going to be sat idle whilst you do this. Once you've got that resource up and running, you want to do 2 things. Firstly, make sure you're producing way more of that resource than is being consumed on this source island so that there is plenty of excess. And 2, set up a trade route between your 2 islands, and this can be done one of 2 ways. You can do it yourself by building your own ship and assigning it to the trade route. Click Create Routes, click the 2 islands, and tell the route to pick up resources from the source and take it to the destination, assign a ship, and you're off to the races. Alternatively, you can charter a route. This is more or less the same process, but you are given an AI-controlled ship to do this for you. This uses a small amount of gold and eventually some influence for maintenance, but the first few are free, so I would say go with this first. And don't worry about influence at this time, I'll come back to that later. On one tip for this one, if your 2 islands aren't too far apart, set the number of resources to be transported to be quite low, otherwise your source will never have any stock and your destination will end up with a lot of excess, which means your ship ends up doing dummy trips. And there, you fulfilled your need using inter-island connections. But of course, the game would be too easy if you only needed 2 islands. The truth is, the further into the game you go, the more islands you're going to need to produce everything, and you'll have so many ships going back and forth that it'll make your head spin. But if you set it up right from the get-go, you'll have less of a pain later on down the line, and can simply tweak it when needed. Of course, every single resource can't all be produced in the same climate, and even in the base game, you'll need to travel to the new world to meet the demands of your ever more difficult residents. Multiple instances follows the same principle as multiple islands, but works on totally different timescales. Obviously, travelling from the UK to America takes quite a while, so this fictional version is no different, and going between the 2 maps takes your ships a significant amount of time. This means you have to take larger amounts of resources back and forth at a time, or add more ships to the route to meet the demand on the other end. This introduces unique problems into your production chain. For example, your artisans require fur coats, and you need wool from alpacas, which can only be made in the New World. However, if there is only 10 pieces of wool when the trade ship arrives, the artisans will run out before the trade ship is even halfway back. This means you need to overproduce resources like crazy and stockpile large amounts so you can meet the large orders each time. You also have to do this whilst meeting the demands of the residents of the New World, which have a whole new list of needs and resources. Fortunately, they only have 2 tiers of skill, so it can only get so complicated. Unfortunately, New World islands aren't as easy to build on as the Old World, with a lot of rivers dividing the space into difficult to use chunks of land. You really have to plan ahead to utilise this space wisely. Bear in mind that while you're doing all this in the New World, you also need to be working on building in the Old World, so, especially when starting out, I would say don't be afraid to use slow motion to get everything done that you need. Also, if you have a numpad on your keyboard, it's worth using the 1 and 2 keys to switch between instances on the fly to save yourself some time. You get to these new locations or instances via expeditions, which I'll explain in their own section, and once you arrive, you of course want to explore and pick the best island, but you're not the only person racing to claim it, so it's worth getting there nice and early. In any standard game, you can have up to 3 other players or companies, and unless you're delving into multiplayer, these will be controlled by the AI. On the standard difficulty, you have 3 AIs, 2 of which are fairly passive, and will even ask permission to sell islands, so you can always have the first pick. The other one is a bit more aggressive and tends to be the dominator for most of the game unless you can beat her. Every AI has a specific way they can behave, and you can discern this from their description in the game setup menu. For example, Princess King is focused on peace and prosperity for all, so she values honesty and generosity, such as being truthful in your newspaper and not raising the work hours of your people. Conversely, Beryl O'Mara is a vindictive old woman who runs her company ruthlessly as her husband died in debt and she's determined not to do the same. She will support you early on, but make no mistake, as soon as you become a threat to her, she will not hesitate to take you out. You can tell the difficulty of an AI via their star rating in the game setup menu. The higher the stars, the better they will be, and the harder it will be to beat them. So start with the lower tier AIs first to ease yourself into it. You can engage in diplomacy with these AIs, ranging from alliances to all-out war, and everything in between, such as trade agreements and non-aggression pacts. Try to keep everyone on side early before deciding who you want to take out first, otherwise it can get a little messy. Alongside these players there are also NPCs which can be there to help or hinder you depending on the character. There are 3 traders who will always remain neutral and will, unsurprisingly, trade with you for items and resources, both buying and selling, and their stock and requests change over the course of the game, so it's always worth checking if you have a surplus of something. Little side note here, items are usable in a variety of buildings such as trade unions, town halls, and harbour masters, as well as ships, and improve them or surrounding buildings in a large number of ways, like too large to list here, so just hover over each one that you see and it'll be pretty self-explanatory. The other 2 are pirates, who most of the time are out to take you down, and generally make your life difficult for both the old and new worlds. Most of the time, I pay them off with ceasefires, which last 2 real-life hours, which is a significant amount of time to get lots done without having to worry about pirates. Eventually, you can amass a military large enough to take them out and destroy their bases, which will temporarily remove them from the map. But like a cockroach, they will keep coming back to recolonize their base, and you should try to prevent this if you can by sinking their new ships before they can reach land. All AIs aside from the pirates can offer you missions, which will reward you with things such as gold, favor with AI players, and sometimes items. These missions are normally one of 5 things: destroy some ships, collect some flotsam, deliver something, escort a ship, or send the quest giver some resources. They are almost always worth doing early on for some easy gold and keeping the AI on side. Now you may be wondering, how do you get rid of a player that is a threat to your company? You can do it in one of 2 ways. Economic is the more elegant way to do it, but it's going to cost a lot of gold, and it's only viable when you have the money to burn. You simply buy shares of a competitor's island via the pie chart menu at the top of the screen. This costs a large chunk of gold, but nets you passive income as a share of that island's income, meaning you can make money from your opponents. Upon owning all shares of an island, you can choose to take it over, which gives you the island but flattens it, removing everything aside from the harbour, meaning you need to start from scratch. This loses that passive income, but ensures that they cannot simply buy the shares back and kick you out over time. Alternatively, combat is the more dramatic way to take over an island, and it involves varying numbers of ships with increasingly large guns. You simply have to attack docklands and reduce the island's morale until they surrender. Every island will have a defensive cannon on the dock, and most will have some other cannons defending them, so this can take some serious firepower and often results in losing a ship or 2. But if you get the morale down low enough, the island will surrender to you, giving you the choice of owning all the shares of the island or flattening it and starting to build it from nothing for yourself. Once all islands of a player have been taken from them, they are removed from the game and taken out. Do this 3 times and you have the whole world to yourself. That being said, we should still take a deeper dive into combat. There are 5 kinds of sail ships in the mid-game, 5 late-game engine-powered ships, and 1 flagship per faction. Sail ships rely on wind, and you can see the direction in the minimap via this icon. Engine ships normally have lower max speed, but it's consistent regardless of the wind. Each ship has a specific purpose, and will be better at some things than others, so let's just rattle those off quickly. Flagships, medium-sized ships that can do a little bit of everything. They're decently fast, have a medium amount of firepower and HP, 3 cargo slots and 2 item slots. You start with one of these, and they can only be replaced via buying a new one from one of the NPCs. As I said, they can do a little bit of everything, so should be your early game workhorse. Schooners, these are smaller trade vessels. They have 2 cargo slots and 1 item slot, decent speed but nothing crazy, no weapons and low HP. These are best suited to safe local trade routes. Gunboats, smaller combat vessels, 1 cargo slot, 2 item slots. Similar speed to the schooner, less HP but does have some light weapons. Best suited being a smaller combat support ship rather than your entire force, as 1 larger ship can take out multiple gunboats. Frigates, medium combat vessels, 3 cargo slots, 2 item slots, good speed, medium damage, and medium health. Middle-of-the-road combat ships that are best suited to ship-to-ship combat with their combination of speed and firepower. They're very similar to the flagship and work great as escort vessels. Clippers, medium cargo vessels, 4 cargo slots, 1 item slot. Great speed, no weapons, medium health. Great mid-game trade ship best suited to routes that take them between instances or across an entire instance. If they are going via dangerous territory, then issue them an escort. Ship of the line, large combat vessel, 3 cargo slots, 3 item slots, slow speed, great weapons, high health. Best suited as a warship in large battles or invading other islands. Cargo ship, first of the engine-powered ships. Large cargo vessel, 6 cargo slots, 2 item slots, high speed, no weapons, high health. Best used for trade routes going between instances to make the most of that high capacity. Battle cruiser, large warship, 3 cargo slots, 4 item slots, decent speed, great damage, very high health. Best used in heavy combat when wind is an issue. Can take on other ships and docks equally. Monitor, medium warship, 2 cargo slots, 2 item slots, good speed, good damage, and medium high health. Best used as an escort for battle cruisers as they are faster and cheaper to run. These are the frigate to the battle cruiser's ship of the line. Oil tankers, large cargo ships, 1 cargo slot that can only carry 400 tons of oil. No item slots, good speed, no weapons, high health. Obviously a cargo ship just for oil, the only choice for moving the stuff between islands. Finally, the world-class reefer, a large cargo ship, 6 cargo slots, 1 item slot, great speed, no damage, and high health. This is a unique ship that travels twice as fast between instances, so it's a great choice for those long-distance trade routes. Obviously, only ships with weapons can engage in combat, and as you might imagine, this is the area where the game is lacking most. But let's be honest, it's not exactly a battling game. You pretty much just select your units, right-click on what you want them to attack, and they'll move to attack and open fire. Aside from using items like mortars, torpedoes, and repair kits, you mostly just fire each other until one of you is taken out. If there are multiple enemies, getting them on either side of your ship can be useful, as each side fires independently, essentially doubling their damage output. Aside from that, it's pretty basic. Take out the biggest threats first, like more powerful warships and larger defense cannons, and work your way down from there. The only other thing you need to know is that every ship costs maintenance in the form of gold and also influence, which brings us nicely to our next chapter. Influence is a currency you accrue over the course of the game by increasing your population across all islands and gaining a large amount of investors, which are the top level of residents. Influence can be spent on a large number of bonuses to your company. You can change the contents of newspapers, which print every 30 to 120 minutes, depending where you are in the game, and by default, they are full of articles about your current progress. So if you're at war or running low on resources, this will have an adverse effect on your people. If you wish to avoid this, you can use influence to change each of the 3 sections of the newspaper to get the desired effects company-wide. These can be a variety of things, like you see on the screen now, and they last until the next newspaper is printed. Upon this, all influence spent is refunded and available to spend on your next newspaper. You can spend influence on trade items such as maintenance for trade ships, charter routes, and eventually airships. This is returned when those ships or routes are no longer part of your company, and by default, you get a few free to start off with. It's spent on upkeep for military ships and buildings. Again, like trade, you get the first few for free, and the influence is returned when you lose the buildings or ships. You can spend it on upgrade buildings such as trade unions for buffing production buildings on land, town halls for buffing residences, and harbour master officers for buffing docklands production buildings. First few are free, and it's all returned when the buildings are destroyed. You can spend it on culture buildings and their modules. These are zoos, museums, and botanical gardens. The first few are free, and it's returned when they are destroyed. Finally, it's automatically spent for every 1,000 island tiles you control, as well as every commuter pier and share that you own. For each of these 6 sections, you unlock rewards for spending large amounts of influence, and the more you spend, the better they are. For propaganda, you gain a 7, 15, and 25% bonus to newspaper effects. For trade, you gain a 7, 15, and 25% bonus to trade ship speed. For military, you gain a 7, 15, and 25% increase to military ship attack speed. For optimization, you gain a -3, -6, and -10% to all maintenance costs. For culture, you gain 10, 20, and 30% increases to island attractiveness. And for expansion, you gain 50, 100, and 200 bonus workforce on every island aside from Mbesa and the Arctic. Most of these things passively add up over the course of the game, but it's worth keeping an eye on to make sure you don't accidentally run out right when you need that extra ship to turn the tide. Speaking of ships, there is one thing that they can do that I haven't mentioned yet. Expeditions, as you might imagine, are trips you can send ships on for a variety of reasons. There are a few which unlock you new instances like the New World region, and of course the 3 other DLC instances. There are also a massive amount of more generic ones that earn you all sorts of items such as animals to place in your zoos, antiques for the museum, plants for the botanical garden, rescue missions for specialist characters and items, and even pirate hunts for more items and treasure maps from the Sunken Treasure DLC. There are 3 levels of difficulty, and the harder they are, the higher tier rewards you'll receive upon completion. To begin an expedition, you select one from the Expedition tab in the top left and select a ship to use. The better ship you use, the higher the base morale of your crew will be. You need to load the ship with items and supplies that will help them with their objectives, outlined in the expedition description along the top. Almost everything in the game has an effect on expeditions, and you can find a full list of these on the expedition pages of the wiki, but hovering over each item can help you out in a pinch. You also need to send them out with enough food to last the trip, which will lessen the morale drain. Once you are happy with their supplies, you can send them off, and they will leave the instance to start their journey. As they progress on the expedition, they will come across certain dilemmas that require your attention to solve. These often require resources and skills you found out when preparing their supplies, and having the correct ones will increase your chances of success and the likelihood of progressing to the end unscathed. After you complete a few of these per expedition, your ship will return, and then you'll be presented with your rewards. As I mentioned earlier, some of these are only available in the base game, but a lot of them are only active when you have some pieces of DLC. To close us off, I thought I'd rattle off each DLC and exactly what it adds to the game, so you know which ones you might want to try out. If you do want to try out any of these pieces of content, including the game itself, then please consider using my Games Planet links in the description so you can both save yourself some money and help support the channel with a small kickback. Starting in Season 1, we have Sunken Treasures. This adds the new instance of Cape Trelawney, which is another old world style area, with a huge island taking up nearly a whole corner of the map for you to build on. You also unlock the diving bell, which allows you to dive for buried treasure in a variety of locations and get access to incredible items using scrap that you find when diving. Alongside this, there is a fun little storyline involving the Queen and a number of brand new fully voiced characters. Botanica is a smaller piece of DLC from Season 1 that adds the Botanical Gardens building, which is a museum type building with a large number of different plants to collect to increase your island attractiveness. You collect these items via expeditions, so there's a whole new set of dilemmas to explore. Alongside this, you unlock the Music Pavilion, which you can use to play different songs and change up the soundtrack and bring class to your islands. The final piece of DLC in Season 1 is the Passage. This sees you venturing to the Arctic to conquer the most hostile environments on Earth. You have to juggle new resource buildings and keep your people warm as you push forward to unlock new resources to help your cities back home and create all new airships, which are extremely fast transport vessels only buildable here. Whatever happens, the city must survive. Kicking off Season 2, we have the Seat of Power. This allows you to build an all-new modular building called the Palace, which allows you to enact policies that affect everything from your culture to your labour. This adds a whole new government to the game, which can be incredibly powerful. Bright Harvest revolutionises farming with the introduction of a couple of new technologies. It adds grain silos to speed up production on your animal farms at the cost of wheat, and adds tractors to your fields to improve their productivity and max size at the cost of a small amount of fuel. Closing Season 2, we have the Land of the Lions. This adds the all-new Embasa instance to the game, which comes with a totally unique set of production chains for a totally different style of people, with beautiful buildings and new problems such as water availability to solve. You can also unlock a whole new class of residents for the old world, scholars, who come with their own set of needs to allow you to push your company into the future with scientific enhancements of all kinds. First up in Season 3, we have the Docklands. This is a new modular building that adds a whole new level of depth to your trade, with new contracts to specialise in exporting and importing different goods. You can also expand this area to assist in everything from resource storage to repair speed for nearby ships. The tourist season introduces a new class of people to your islands, tourists. These of course come with their own list of demands, building and resource chains that you have to fulfill to keep them happy. They also require transport around the island in the form of bus stops to keep everything connected and easy to access. Finally, closing Season 3, we have the latest DLC to be released, the High Life. This adds skyscrapers to house your most illustrious engineers and investors vertically instead of spread out. They also come with a whole new set of fancy products they'll undoubtedly demand. And finally, you unlock a few cosmetics, as well as the Skyline Tower, which is the crowning technological achievement for any endgame industrialist. We also have a few small content packs that add decorative items to the game. The Holiday Pack adds a number of Christmas-themed items to get you into that Christmas spirit. The City Lights Pack adds a number of new lighting items and other decorative items such as parks and restaurants to light up your city in the nighttime. The Amusement Pack adds a number of theme park themed items to allow you to make a fun little theme park area to your island. Finally, the Vehicle Liveries Pack adds a number of cosmetics for your ships, trains and more to set them apart from the others. All of these are purely cosmetic and don't really add anything else to the game, but they do look nice if you have a bit of spare cash. And I believe that covers everything for the complete beginner's guide to Anno 1800. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you did, then leave it a like, as it really does help out so much. If you want to see more content like this, then definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel, as I post new videos every single week. If you have any other questions about Anno, then leave them down in the comments, or feel free to join the Discord and ask me there, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. I'd like to thank all supporters of the channel, both here on YouTube as well as on Twitch and on Patreon. In particular, Kobe Said So and It's Your Boy LC for their wonderful support at the Unclean Ones tier. Really can't thank you guys enough. One more time, thank you all so very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.